What began as a celebration of love turned into a nightmare. In less than 24 hours, that would forever scar the small town of Haven Ridge. The wedding of Jonah Rivers and Elena Hart was supposed to mark the beginning of a lifetime together. Instead, it became the prelude to a shocking tragedy, one that exposed a web of deception so deeply rooted that no one saw it coming. Jonah Rivers, a preacher revered for his fiery sermons on morality, had always been a man the community admired. His words carried weight, his teachings drew crowds, and his faith seemed unshakable. To those who knew him, Jonah was a man of principles, a beacon of righteousness in a world full of sin. Elena Hart, a schoolteacher known for her compassion and unyielding optimism, believed she had found her perfect match in Jonah. Their courtship had been one of purity and faith, a relationship that embodied the values they both held dear. But what Elena didn't know was that beneath Jonah's composed exterior lay a secret so devastating it would unravel the very foundation of their union. On their wedding day, the church was alive with joy. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows. Friends and family gathered to witness the union of two souls they believed were destined to be together. Elena, dressed in an elegant white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her smile radiant. She glanced at Jonah, who stood at the altar, his eyes locked on hers. His broad shoulders and steady demeanor conveyed confidence, but beneath the surface, his mind raced with anxiety. As the pastor began the ceremony, Jonah's voice trembled slightly as he recited his vows. "I vow to protect you, to cherish you, and to honor our bond before God," he said, the weight of his words pressing down on him. Elena's voice was steady as she promised her own devotion, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I promise to stand by you through every challenge, to trust you, and to love you all the days of my life." The congregation erupted into applause as the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. Jonah leaned in to kiss Elena, his lips brushing hers with a practiced tenderness. To the crowd, it was a moment of pure joy. To Jonah, it was a ticking clock. The reception that followed was filled with laughter and celebration. Guests toasted the happy couple, their words brimming with admiration for the union. Elena's father spoke warmly of his daughter's strength and Jonah's unwavering faith. But even amidst the laughter and joy, Jonah felt the walls closing in. Every smile, every kind word was a reminder of the truth he had hidden for so long. His secret loomed over him like a storm cloud, and the wedding night would bring it crashing down. When the celebration ended and the guests departed, Jonah and Elena retreated to their hotel room, leaving behind the cheers and well-wishes of their loved ones. For Elena, the night ahead was a step into the future she had always dreamed of, a life of love and partnership. For Jonah, it was the beginning of the end. Jonah Rivers sat silently in the corner of the hotel room, his hands clasped tightly together. The glow of the bedside lamp illuminated his face, but the shadows in his eyes ran deeper than the dim light could reach. Across the room, Elena Hart was humming softly, her fingers delicately unpinning the intricate curls of her hair. Her smile lingered, her heart full of joy and anticipation. "You were amazing today," she said, glancing at him through the mirror. "Every word you spoke during the vows felt so real, so powerful. I'm so lucky to have you." Jonah swallowed hard, his throat dry. Her words were a dagger, a painful reminder of the lie he had carried into their marriage. He forced a smile, his heart pounding in his chest. "You looked beautiful," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena turned to face him, her expression soft and inviting. "This is our night, Jonah. The first night of the rest of our lives. Can you believe it?" He could only nod, his mind racing. He knew this moment would come. It was inevitable. Every step of their relationship had led to this night, and no amount of preparation or prayer could save him now. Jonah's secret was a burden he had carried since his youth. Growing up in Haven Ridge, he had been the subject of relentless ridicule. Children mocked him, whispering cruel words that echoed in his mind long after the school bell rang. His body, the source of their taunts, had become a symbol of his deepest shame. In his early 20s, Jonah found solace in religion. The church offered him refuge, a place where he could build a new identity, one rooted in faith and purpose. Becoming a preacher allowed him to command respect and admiration, shielding him from the vulnerability he so feared. By advocating for purity and chastity, he had constructed boundaries that ensured no one would ever discover his secret. Until now. Elena rose from the chair, crossing the room to stand in front of him. Her gown shimmered as she moved, a vision of beauty and love. She reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Jonah, are you nervous?" she asked gently, her eyes searching his. "A little," he admitted, his voice tight. She smiled, squeezing his hand. "That's okay, I am too. But we've waited for this moment, haven't we? It's going to be perfect." Jonah looked away, his chest tightening with panic. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to explain, to confess everything before it was too late. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stood and moved to the window, his back to her. Outside, the world was quiet. The town square was empty, the streetlights casting long shadows on the cobblestone paths. "Jonah," Elena said softly, her voice tinged with concern. "Is something wrong?" He turned to face her, his hands trembling. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his words faltering. Her expression shifted, worry creeping into her eyes. "What is it?" Jonah's heart raced as he struggled to find the right words. But before he could speak, Elena took a step closer, her hand resting on his arm. "Whatever it is, we can face it together," she said, her voice steady. "That's what marriage is about, right? Trust, honesty, and love. I'm here for you, Jonah." Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened his despair. Trust, honesty. Words he had built his sermons around, words he had preached to hundreds of faithful listeners. Yet here he was, unable to embody them himself. "Let's just take things slow tonight," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "There's no rush." Elena's brow furrowed, but she nodded. "Of course," she said, her smile returning. "Whatever you need." She kissed his cheek softly, then turned away to change into her nightgown. Jonah stood frozen, the weight of his deception pressing down on him like never before. This was supposed to be the happiest night of their lives. But for Jonah, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Elena Hart emerged from the bathroom, her white satin nightgown flowing gracefully around her. She smiled at Jonah, who sat stiffly on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the comforter, as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the room. "This is nice," she said softly, brushing her hair over her shoulder. "Just you and me. Finally." Jonah forced a smile, but his jaw tightened. The warmth in her eyes only deepened his dread. She trusted him, loved him, believed in him, and that trust was about to shatter. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. "Jonah, you've been so quiet tonight. What's going on?" He hesitated, his throat dry. This was it. There was no turning back. "Elena, he began, his voice shaking. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." Her smile faded, concerned with knitting her brow. "What is it?" Jonah's chest tightened as he fought to find the words. The shame he had buried for years clawed its way to the surface, choking him. "Elena, I haven't been honest with you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Her hand tightened on his knee. Honest about what? He couldn't meet her eyes. About me, about my body. For a moment, there was silence. The hum of the air conditioning filled the room as Elena processed his words. "Your body," she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. Jonah nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "There's something different about me. Something I've been too ashamed to share." Elena stared at him, her concern deepening. "Jonah, whatever it is, you can tell me. I love you. Nothing will change that." Her words struck him like a blow. He wanted to believe her, but deep down, he knew the truth. The moment she understood, everything would change. Taking a deep breath, Jonah stood and turned away. His voice was barely audible as he said, "You'll see." Elena's heart raced as she watched him, her mind spinning with questions. What could be so terrible that Jonah, a man she had trusted with her life, had kept it hidden for so long? When he finally turned back to her, his face was pale, his eyes full of anguish. Slowly, he stepped closer, his hands trembling as he began to unbutton his shirt. "Jonah," Elena said, her voice trembling now, "you're scaring me. Please, just tell me." But Jonah couldn't speak. He removed his shirt and stood before her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Elena's eyes widened as the truth hit her like a thunderclap. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart, had kept a secret so deeply buried that it now threatened to destroy them both. "You," she stammered, her voice breaking, "you lied to me." Jonah's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "Elena, I didn't know how to tell you. I thought—" "You thought what?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "That I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't care? Jonah, how could you do this to me?" He reached for her, but she pulled away, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. "You built this entire relationship on a lie," she said, her voice trembling. "You used faith as a shield to hide the truth. How could you?" "Elena, please," Jonah pleaded, his voice cracking. "I was scared. I thought once we were married, it wouldn't matter anymore." Her eyes blazed with anger. "It matters, Jonah. It matters because you didn't trust me enough to be honest. You manipulated me into thinking this was about righteousness and purity. But it was all about you, your fear, your shame." Jonah dropped to his knees, his hands clasped in desperation. "Please, Elena, I love you. I've always loved you. Don't leave me. We can get through this together." Elena shook her head, her voice cold. "This isn't love, Jonah. Love is built on trust, and you've given me none of that." She stood and began to gather her things, her movements quick and purposeful. Jonah's desperation turned to panic as he realized what she was doing. "You can't leave," he said, rising to his feet. "Elena, we made vows. Marriage isn't something you walk away from." "No, Jonah," she replied, her voice firm. "Marriage is about honesty and respect, and you've given me neither." As she reached for her suitcase, Jonah stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just walk out and ruin everything." Elena looked him in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "You ruined this, Jonah, not me." His composure cracked, and for the first time the calm, collected preacher revealed the storm beneath. "If you leave, you'll destroy me," he said, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. Elena's voice softened, but her resolve remained firm. "No, Jonah. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose to lie. I won't live in a marriage built on deceit." She brushed past him, her suitcase in hand. Jonah stood frozen, his mind racing. His world was crumbling, and he was powerless to stop it. As Elena reached for the door, Jonah's voice broke through the silence. "Elena, wait!" But she didn't turn back. The night that began with hope and joy ended in silence and broken trust. For Elena, it was the end of a dream. For Jonah, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Elena Hart's suitcase thudded against the hardwood floor as she made her way toward the hotel door. Her heart raced with a mixture of anger and betrayal. Her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. Jonah Rivers, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, stood frozen behind her, his chest heaving as desperation overtook him. "You can't do this, Elena," Jonah said, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, his hands trembling. "You can't just leave. Think about what this means for us, for the church, for everything." Elena stopped and turned to face him, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're really going to lecture me about what this means? You lied to me, Jonah. You made me believe in something that wasn't real. Don't you dare talk to me about the consequences." Jonah clenched his fists at his sides, the weight of her words sinking in. "I didn't lie to hurt you," he said quietly. "I was afraid you wouldn't love me if you knew." Elena's laughter was bitter, her voice shaking with anger. "Love? You think this is about love? Love is built on trust, Jonah. And you used your faith, our faith, as a weapon to manipulate me. How could you?" "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Jonah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought once we were married, it wouldn't matter." "Well, it matters," Elena snapped. "It matters because you made me believe in a lie. You trapped me, Jonah, and now you expect me to just accept it, to stay and pretend everything is fine." Her words struck Jonah like a hammer, his chest tightening as the walls of his carefully constructed world began to crumble. "I love you," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "I've always loved you. Can't we fix this? Can't we find a way to move past it?" Elena shook her head, her resolve unshaken. "No, Jonah. I won't live my life chained to a lie. You've taken something sacred and turned it into a prison." She reached for the doorknob, but Jonah stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His face was etched with desperation, his eyes wild. "You can't leave," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just walk out and ruin everything." Elena's voice was cold and steady. "I'm not the one who ruined this, Jonah. You did that all on your own." As she tried to step past him, Jonah grabbed her arm, his grip tight and unyielding. "You can't expose me. You don't know what that will do." "Let go of me," Elena said, her voice firm as she struggled against his hold. "Jonah, I mean it. Let me go." But Jonah's grip only tightened, his fear turning into blind panic. "You're not leaving me," he said through gritted teeth. "I won't let you ruin everything." "Ruin everything," Elena shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. "You've already ruined it, Jonah. You and your lies." The confrontation spiraled out of control as Jonah's emotions overtook him. In a moment of rage, he lashed out, striking Elena. The blow sent her stumbling backward, her head striking the edge of the bed frame with a sickening thud. The room fell silent as Elena crumpled to the floor, motionless. Jonah froze, his chest heaving as the reality of what he had done set in. "Elena," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside her. "Elena, wake up, please." He shook her gently, his hands trembling, but there was no response. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, but his survival instincts kicked in. He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing as he tried to piece together a plan. He wiped the surfaces, straightened the room, and grabbed a small bag of belongings. Then he fled, leaving behind the woman who had trusted him, loved him, and now lay lifeless because of his lies. A knock at the door startled the housekeeper as she approached with her cleaning cart. Receiving no response, she hesitated before using her master key to enter. The sight that greeted her froze her in place. Elena's body lay crumpled on the floor, her head resting at an unnatural angle. Blood had pooled near the edge of the bed frame, staining the once pristine carpet. The housekeeper screamed, dropping her supplies as she stumbled back into the hallway. Within minutes, hotel management and law enforcement were on the scene, cordoning off the area as investigators began their work. Detective Sarah Harlow arrived at the hotel, her years of experience etched into the lines on her face. She stepped into the room, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. To her trained mind, the overturned lamp, faint smudges on the door handle, and partially packed suitcase painted a clear picture. There had been a struggle. Elena's lifeless body told its own tragic story. Bruising on her arms suggested she had been grabbed, perhaps restrained. The blunt force trauma to her head indicated a violent impact, likely from the edge of the bed frame. "Who found her?" Detective Harlow asked, turning to the officer who had cordoned off the hallway. "The housekeeper," the officer replied. "She said the bride checked in last night with her husband. No one saw him leave." "Start with the security footage," Harlow ordered, "and get a team to process this room thoroughly. I want every fingerprint, every fiber." As detectives pieced together the events of the previous night, the hotel's security footage became a critical clue. It showed Jonah Rivers leaving in the early hours of the morning, his movements hurried and erratic. He carried a small bag and avoided eye contact with the front desk staff. The community of Haven Ridge was in shock as news of Elena's death spread. The couple everyone had celebrated just hours before was now at the center of a murder investigation. Friends and family were interviewed, and troubling details began to emerge. Elena's sister, Clara, recounted a conversation she had with Elena just days before the wedding. She mentioned that Jonah was acting strange, Clara said, her voice breaking. She thought he was nervous, but she did have doubts. Other witnesses described Jonah as tense and withdrawn during the reception, though most attributed it to typical wedding day stress. Detective Harlow's team quickly identified Jonah as their prime suspect. A manhunt was launched, with law enforcement tracking his movements through credit card transactions and witness sightings. After a week on the run, Jonah was found hiding in a rundown motel in a neighboring state. When officers entered the room, he offered no resistance. His once pristine appearance was replaced by disheveled hair, bloodshot eyes, and the weary expression of a man haunted by his actions. "I knew you'd find me," Jonah said quietly as officers placed him in handcuffs. During his interrogation, Jonah confessed to everything. His voice cracked as he recounted the events of that fateful night. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his head in his hands. "She was going to leave. She was going to tell everyone about me." When asked what he meant, Jonah hesitated before admitting the truth he had hidden for so long. "I was ashamed," he whispered. "Ashamed of my body, of who I am. I thought if we were married, it wouldn't matter. But she couldn't accept it. Detective Harlow watched him closely, her expression neutral. "So, you chose to keep her from leaving," she said, her voice steady. "By force." Jonah nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean to kill her. I lost control." Back in Haven Ridge, the news of Jonah's confession sent shockwaves through the community. The man they had admired, the preacher they had trusted, was now revealed as a liar and a murderer. Elena's family was devastated. Her mother, Mary Ann, spoke through tears during a vigil held in her daughter's memory. "Elena was a light in this world," she said, her voice trembling. "She deserved honesty, love, and respect. Instead, she was betrayed by the one person she trusted most." The community gathered in mourning, their grief mingled with disbelief. How could someone like Jonah Rivers, so admired, so respected, be capable of such a heinous act? As Jonah awaited trial, the evidence against him mounted. Forensic reports confirmed the struggle in the hotel room, and witnesses painted a damning picture of his manipulation and deceit. Prosecutors prepared a case that would hold him accountable not only for Elena's death, but also for the years of lies that led to it. Elena's sister Clara spoke to reporters outside the courthouse, her face etched with anger and sadness. "This isn't just about my sister," she said. "This is about every person who has been manipulated, deceived, or hurt by someone they trusted. Jonah Rivers has to face the consequences of his actions." The courtroom was packed as Jonah Rivers' trial began. Reporters, community members, and Elena Hart's grieving family filled the seats, eager for justice. Jonah sat at the defendant's table, his once charismatic presence replaced by a hollow, defeated man. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They described Jonah as a man who had lived a life of deceit, using his position of trust to manipulate those around him. They presented damning evidence. The hotel surveillance footage, forensic findings from the crime scene, and testimonies from friends and family who had witnessed troubling signs leading up to the wedding. Elena's sister Clara took the stand, her voice steady despite the weight of her grief. "Elena believed in love, in honesty, in faith," she said. "Jonah used her beliefs against her. He trapped her in a web of lies, and when she tried to escape, he took her life." Jonah's defense team argued that his actions were the result of deep psychological struggles stemming from his childhood insecurities. A psychologist testified that Jonah's fear of rejection had driven him to desperation, painting him as a man who had acted impulsively in a moment of panic. But the jury was unmoved. After weeks of emotional testimony and compelling evidence, they returned a verdict. Jonah Rivers was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge, addressing Jonah during sentencing, spoke with stern finality. "You betrayed the trust of those who loved you, and in doing so, you took a life that was full of promise. This court sentences you to life in prison." Elena's family wept as the sentence was read, their tears a mixture of sorrow and relief. Justice had been served, but the loss of Elena left a void that could never be filled. Elena Hart's legacy lived on through her family and the community she had touched. Her parents established the Elena Hart Foundation, advocating for honesty and transparency in relationships, and offering support to victims of emotional manipulation. Jonah Rivers, once a revered preacher, now spent his days in the solitude of a prison cell. The man who had preached faith and morality to hundreds was left to confront the lies that had defined his life.